Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are on the 2007 Legacy 2.5i limited sedan. We are going to be removing and rebuilding the power steering pump. As we talked about in the breakdown on all the things wrong with the car, we talked about the fact that the power steering pump was leaking severely and it was causing issues with the steering system, of course, due to the fact that it was leaking so much that the fluid level was dropping below the optimal level. So as I mentioned in that video, there were two ways we could go about it. We could attempt to rebuild it. Rebuild kit from Subaru, if I recall correctly, is not available. Gates, on the other hand, does make a rebuild kit for the 2007 2.5i pump. It is part number 348827. As most of you know, I like to stay with OE parts. I don't like aftermarket parts. But in this case, this is what we're going to be using. I believe this kit was about $30 on Amazon Prime. I'll link it in the description of the video below. And as we talked about in that video, our second option was to completely replace the pump with a new pump. And I believe that ran $300 some odd from Subaru. I'll put the exact price down in the video here with the part number. So with that said, let's go ahead and get to it, get out to the car and get the power steering pump removed. Bring it in here on the toolbox and start rebuilding it. So apologies, it has gotten quite windy and cool today, so hopefully the mic does not pick up all the wind noise in the background. So very minimal tools needed. We need to remove the push pins here. There should be two of them, but this vehicle is missing one of them. To get the air intake snorkel out of the way, set it back here. This gives us a little bit more access to our power steering pump. As far as fasteners, you shouldn't need much more than a 10 millimeter for the belt guard and then 12 millimeter for the power steering pump mounting bolts to slacken the alternator to get the belt loose, and then a pair of pliers to pull the hose clamp and hose off the suction hose, which in this case, as hard as a rock, needs to be replaced. And I think it's a 14 millimeter for the high pressure hose that goes into the side of the power steering pump, and that's basically it. All right, so we've got a 10 here. Here. And one more 10 over here. Don't have to take it out completely, just loosen it enough to sling it over out of the way. Can put this bolt back in place, keep track of it. The only thing left holding it on is this 12 millimeter bolt here for the alternator. We need to loosen that anyway. Just loosen it a couple rounds and that should come right off of there. Set the belt guard to the side. Can put that bolt back in there to keep track of it. Now you have a 12 millimeter here and a 12 millimeter here. Loosen this and loosen this to loosen the power steering pump belt. Now you should be able to get your power steering pump belt off. Set that to the side. Now that that's all freed, we need to go ahead and get our suction and pressure hose or line removed from the pump. You will be spilling some fluid here, so be careful. Get that loose and get the suction hose loose. Again, we won't be able to reuse it because it's gotten so hard. We need to go ahead and replace it. Now that's hard. It's going to start sucking air around that connector and the pump will make noise no matter what we do. on the rebuild. Let's go ahead and work that hose loose and get it elevated so it doesn't leak. It'll be good to go ahead and cap it off with something to plug up the end of it. Which we can do just like so. Let's plug that hose. I've already made a mess while I walked off, but engine's coming out for a rebuild anyway, so it's gonna be cleaned. Fluid needs to be replaced anyway, so no big loss there. So we'll go ahead and get the pressure hose out of the way. Get it up and elevated. Not really a good way to block it off. All right, so now that that's done, we can take our one electrical pigtail loose right here on top of the pump. Little push tab. Now you can do it two ways. You can either remove the pump and bracket together, or you can remove the pump by itself. Easier to remove the pump by itself on the older models because of the way it's mounted, but these later model pumps have the bolt going in through this way, and it's hard to get it out, so it'd be best to go ahead and remove the pump with the bracket attached and then detach it from the bracket later. So you've got a 12mm bolt here, and I believe there's two down here on top of the timing belt cover, and all of this will come up. You will have to take the bolt completely out of the side of the alternator though, because the alternator does bolt to the side of the power steering bracket there. All right, so one 12mm back here. And two up front. Be hard to show you that. If you look directly below here, you'll see the first one. Right there. And our second one, if you look to the front and down from here, you'll see it hiding. And our last bolt. And with that, all you gotta do is pull the pump straight up. Now that the pump's out of the way, we can thoroughly clean our gigantic mess here on top of the engine block and get it ready for the installation of our nicely rebuilt pump or a new pump, whichever you're doing. All right, now that we've got that area cleaned up on the engine block, we can turn our attention back to the power steering pump itself. It's attached to the bracket, so we need to go ahead and get it removed from the bracket. I've got, I believe, a 14 mil here. Yeah, 14mm bolt here, and then there are two Torx headed fasteners. I believe it's a T30 or T27 in here to remove, and then the pump can be removed from the bracket. We'll clean all of this really well, then we'll take it inside on the bench before disassembling. We do not want all this junk on it, so we're gonna clean it as best as we can before we go to disassemble it. So we're gonna go ahead and remove that 14, the two Torx fasteners inside of the pulley, and get these two pieces separated. All right, pump is off and cleaned as well as I could with the pulley still on. Looked like there was a lot of leakage around the front shaft seal slung underneath the pulley. Also looked like there was quite a bit here at the gasket between the rear plate and the body. Hopefully you guys can see this. It's not very light in here. I'll try to fix that in post-production. First, we're going to remove the pulley 19mm nut. Usually can just hold it with your hand like so, hit it with the impact. This pulley should remove by hand very easily. And as you can see, if the camera will focus, there is a ton of gunk around here. Looks like our front pump shaft seal is our main culprit here for the leak. But this is a Showa pump, which is odd. Didn't realize that before. Sounds like we might have a front bearing issue, but it might also be the grit and junk in here as I rotate that pump drive. But I'm gonna go ahead and take off camera, clean all this up so we can get the snap ring in here, and we'll be right back. All right, got that all cleaned up here. Still got a little bit of noise to it. We'll have to check that bearing, make sure it's not just some grit and junk still stuck up in there. So let's go ahead and switch to a 10mm socket, and we'll go ahead and remove our bracket here. That holds the belt guard in place. I'll also flip over and move this tin here. That holds our connector and holds in our suction hose. You might be able to make it out. There's some gray RTV squished out around here, so at some point they tried and failed to seal this up. There's an O-ring here. That O-ring I think is in the kit. Hopefully RTV silicone did not get into the pump itself. I should only hope as much. But yeah, if you have a leak there, replace the O-ring. Do not put RTV silicone around that. You could get that in your pump and tear it up and be bad times to the tune of nearly $400. So I'll go ahead and clean this up off camera and check that O-ring. It's rock hard. And before we do that, we'll go ahead and flip over. We're going to remove this switch here. It can stay in the back plate. Switch over to a 12mm socket now and remove the 4 bolts for the rear pump housing. Now this is where you got to be careful, because this is where all the vanes and rotors are. So when you take this apart, you're going to have a game of 52 pickup if you're not careful in how you split the pump body. So come apart like that. There's all your vanes and rotors for the actual pump. There is still some fluid in here. Probably go and take and drain that out. And there is our main body O-ring. It is hard, not very pliable. Don't want to break it. But that is where a lot of our leakage is probably coming from, is that body seal right here, this O-ring, and from that nose seal that's in here. So again, I'm going to go take this and drain this out, and we'll be back. All right, most of the fluid's out, but not 100% of it's going to come out. Switching back to our 19mm. Take loose our, not exactly sure what this is. I think it regulates pressure on the pump. There's a spring in here and a hollow bolt. But take that out. Next comes the fun part of trying to get the rotor housing, or the rotor and the pump mechanism out without all the rotor vanes going everywhere. Usually I just put my hand over it like this, flip it over, and hope it comes out in one piece, but no luck, all the vanes are coming out. So there we go. We got the assembly out now. Carefully flip this back over. We'll stick the vanes back in that came loose. They are only one way that they're supposed to go in there. They have a rounded edge that faces out towards the wall. So be sure you put it back in there the correct way. It does have like a gold coloring on that edge, just so you know. If you don't put it in there, that will not form a good seal and pressurize with the pump running. So nothing looks super scarred up or destroyed in here. All looks pretty much the way it should. I don't see any metal shavings or anything of that nature, any kind of anything that would cause an issue with the actual pump mechanically. So now that we've got that out of the way and have created more of a mess, there's an O-ring here, an O-ring here. We're going to need to flip this over and take the snap ring out, and I think if I recall correctly, rubber mallet, we can drive this drive shaft out, and there is, I believe, a seal in here. Very carefully, this O-ring, which is extremely hard. Don't want to wiggle that too much, and then this ring right here, also pretty daggum stiff, hard. All right, so that should be all the seals in here. There should be an O-ring on the end. There is, of this little bolt right here. That should be in the kit. I'll flip over the front of the housing, get this snap ring out, and then drive out the nose and bearing so we can get to that front seal behind that bearing. All right, so grab our snap ring pliers, drop them in our snap ring, squeeze. The snap ring seems to be very strongly set in there. Hopefully it's not rusted into the bore. Don't want to break the tips off of the snap ring pliers, so it is pretty crusty in there, so I might get a pick and a screwdriver and try to free it up before I grab it with the snap ring pliers. Again, don't want to break that nose or the little tips off of the snap ring pliers. All right, took a pick and dug at the ends of that snap ring and got it freed up. We can use our snap ring pliers now. So grab it, squeeze that in. Only getting one side of it free, but we'll get that up above the lip. Slowly pop that up, put our thumb there. Have your safety glasses on so you don't pop yourself in the eye. There we go. Yeah, pretty rusty, gross. Good thing we got a new one in our kit. Need to go through and clean this bore really well where that snap ring sits as well. Get all that corrosion out of there. Also will help when we drive out this shaft and the bearing. So what we're going to do is flip this over, take a rubber mallet, and just hit on this a couple times. It should knock that bearing and the shaft on through the housing. All right, so rubber mallet or a block of wood and a hammer here, and you will drive the shaft with the bearing through the front. Our bearing actually sounds pretty decent now that I've got it out. It does need some cleanup. There is some corrosion around the outside. This is a standard NTN bearing that you can order if yours is bad. All of the numbers are on this bearing. It's an NTN USA 16203V269. So your part number is on it. You can search that, probably get it on Amazon, but it's just a standard bearing, just press fit onto this shaft. So just going to clean that up real quick. Again, check it, make sure there's no grinding or any weird noises. There's your main seal there. That's our culprit. That's our leak. This is the main problem on this pump due to the amount of buildup of leakage and junk around here and inside of that pulley. So we'll need to knock this seal out and replace it with the one in the kit. Very easily, you should be able to use a longer punch or a drift and go through here and just catch the very edge of it and just tap it out. It shouldn't be in there very hard, shouldn't be very difficult to drive it out. Be careful with this. You do not want to gouge or scratch the surface or the new seal will not seal. So be very careful when knocking out the old gasket, old seal there. Yeah, I think we got it, or I knocked a hole in it one. Knocked a hole in it. got it there. Yep. So there's our old brittle seal out of there. So we're just going to clean up the bore really quickly, eyeball, make sure we didn't scratch it with that punch driving it through. And we will drive our new seal in, which is very easy to do. You just find a socket that's the same outer dimension and just punch it on through there, and it will stop where it's supposed to stop. It's got a little ledge to sit on. So nothing overly complex to do. So the new nose seal right here. Go ahead and drop it in like so. Be careful when you do this. You don't want it to drive in sideways or crooked. Check it every so often to make sure you're still going straight. And there we go, and they're flush and flat. Now once that's back in place and driven in, ready to go, you can take a little bit of power steering fluid and lube up the lip of it. Lube up the bushing inside as well. You can lube up the outside of your bearing. You can get ready to drop it in and drive it back in flush, again for a rubber mallet or a wood block on top, just until this bearing seats where you can get your snap ring back in place. All right, so we've got that driven back in till it got flush with that lip there. And we got our new snap ring, much bulkier, stouter than the old one. It shouldn't really matter. It's a snap ring. It's just keeping it from working its way out of the pump. So go ahead and install the new snap ring. Like so. Make sure that it gets in the groove. Yep, and snaps into place just like so. Flip it over. Now we can replace our 3 O-rings in here. So we'll install those O-rings like so. And the inside gap and the outside gap. Now that that's installed, we can go ahead and set the entire pump body assembly back into place. So you need to line up all of your shafts. It should drop right into place. There you go, it drops right down. I have to turn it a little bit to get down on there flush and snug. I'm gonna move it to get that locator pin to drop in. There we go. All right, now we've got a little small seal right up here. It's a little piece of rubber and nylon. It's 2 pieces. It's in the kit. And slide that out very carefully off of there. Yep. So there's your seal there. Again, 2 pieces, a little rubber piece and this little composite piece. The one in the gasket kit is green. So we'll slide that, stack them together. Hard to show you, it's very, very tiny. And then slide it back down in that groove till flush. Now we can put our little dowel pin back in there. Go. Slide that down. Wiggle it back and forth till it drops and seats all the way through. There we go. We'll Once that's done, you can go ahead and take your little plug here with the spring, put the new O-ring on it, and reinstall it. Honestly, guys, I don't know torque specifications for the power steering pump. I don't think Subaru even shows a rebuild of them in the service manual. I've always just ran them in snug with the impact and never had an issue. All right, new O-ring is on. We'll go ahead and start this. Run it in. Couple pops with the impact. And you viewers that are familiar with the channel, you know I don't normally advise running anything with the impact. I always advise torquing things to specification. All right, we got these two O-rings to replace here, then our big body O-ring to put on, and we will be ready to seal this pump back up and put it back into service. Hopefully 100% leak free. Go one out, totally flat, hard, no spring in it. There we go. These O-rings, once they get hard and brittle like that, are hard to get out. All right, now that both of the new rear O-rings here are in and our rear body O-ring, go ahead and put the pump back together. Again, make sure there's no debris or any loose fibers or any dirt or anything here before we put these pieces back together. We don't want any junk getting in the pump. Just like so. Put our 12mm bolts back in. Snug them all back up. And should be good on that. Come back around to the front side here. We're going to get our suction pipe, put our new O-ring onto it, and make sure it's lubed up. Stick it in there, line your hole up, put your bracket back, and run your 10mm bolt down. And tighten it up. Just snug. Don't want to break that off. And we can come around to the front side here and reattach our bracket for the belt guard. Like so. And lastly, we can go ahead and put our pulley back on. And pulley nut. $19mm again. And snug her on up. And there we have our fully resealed power steering pump ready to install and go back on the vehicle. Might as well, while we're here, go ahead and put it back in the power steering pump bracket. All right, so let's go ahead and put our power steering pump back into our bracket. So it'll be easy to go ahead and just bolt it on as an assembly once we get back out to the car. All right, after wiggling the pump down into the bracket and uttering a few profanities, you can go ahead and put your 14 mil bolt in here. Don't want to tighten it just yet because you've got to come around to the front and put this bracket under here and line up your T40 bolts. So come back and tighten those bad boys up. There's actually a torque spec I'm thinking for these in the service manual. I'll put it on the screen for you. Obviously I'm not worried about it. So tighten the two on the front first, then finish your 14 on the back. We're all set, ready to drop this back into the car, bolt to the engine. All right, now we can go ahead and reinstall the pump in reverse order of the removal. Of course, we've cleaned everything up, all our spilled fluid. Be careful when installing these 12mm headed bolts. They are extremely common for getting damaged and stripped out of the engine block. You do want to tighten the front two mounting bolts before you tighten the rear mounting bolt. These bolts are to be torqued to 22 Newton meters. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and reconnect our electrical connector, just like so. And go ahead and reinstall our suction hose and our pressure hose. Again, would be advised to go ahead and replace the suction hose on this car, but I do not have one at the moment, so cannot replace it right now. I have to do that later. Let's be quick and careful so you don't make a mess, or try not to make a mess. Now you want to tighten this down to 7 Newton meters. or 10.5 if you over torque it. So that is tight. Now we can install the suction hose. Again, being careful not to make a mess, spilling fluid everywhere. Slide it on up. Slide our clamp back in place. There we go. And like so, suction hose is back on. Now we can reattach the alternator to the tensioner bracket here. And hand actuate the pump. Try to get some fluid in it so we don't dry start the pump. Now install your belt. Make sure your belt's fully seated in your grooves. Tighten the tensioner. Get your belt nice and tight, but not too tight. At the longest run of the belt, you should be able to just turn it about 90 degrees. That should have it properly tensioned. Go ahead and tighten up the 12mm headed bolt on the alternator beside the tensioner. And go ahead and remove this tin here. Get our belt guard. Slide that behind the washer on the head of our bolt here for the alternator. Swing that over. Start our 10mm bolt back. Tighten it down. Like so. Tighten our 12 on the back side of the alternator as my ratchet falls into the front bumper. That's good and tight. Flip over, remove this tin again, pull the belt guard for the AC compressor, and tighten these two tins. So tighten our tin here, and our tin over here. And now we can reinstall our intake scoop. Reinstall the push pins into the radiator support. And we are set. We can check our power steering fluid level, start the car, and turn our steering wheel all the way right, all the way left, lock to lock, back and forth until all the noise subsides, all the air is bled from the power steering system. It is advisable to jack up the front end of the car so you can turn the wheel more freely and don't have to worry about the friction of the tires on the ground or driveway or concrete or whatever surface you're working on. And that basically does it. All right, we're all set to start the car and bleed the power steering system. turning the wheel back and forth. Got quiet very quickly, only a couple little groans. Double check our fluid level and we should be good. And real quick check for leaks. So looking at the fluid level, we're just below maximum cold level. I'll add just a hair of fluid and we will leak check, and this repair will be all done. Fluid is moving well in the reservoir, not seeing any air bubbles, good signs. You are going to see some smoke coming up. That's from leaking oil from the head gaskets burning off the exhaust from the car sitting. So looking all over the pump, it appears to be dry. Doesn't look like we have any leaks. Looks like we are done with this repair. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.